entrevista de Alfredo Corchado al embajador James Jones.
I know. We had plenty of challenges.
I arrived in, I think, December of '94.
Yeah.
Ambassador Jones, thank you very much.
Do you need a microphone or anything?
There is a microphone.
Oh, is there?
Yeah, it was pretty good.
Okay.
We're talking about your term, 1993 to 1997.
All right.
Very tumultuous time. Talk about the challenges that you face.
Well, the first challenge was to finish the negotiations of NAFTA, to get it passed through our Congress and to implement it properly. After that, then, of course, we had the uprising in Chiapas. We had the assassination of Colosio, the presidential candidate. We had the peso devaluation, the tequila issue, and it went on from there. So from the standpoint of professional challenges, it was a wonderful time to be there. But it was very difficult to kind of keep it all together. And the challenges were twofold. Number one, to explain to the Mexican people and the Mexican government what we were doing to support them and to be their friend and ally. And then to explain to the American people what all these, because only news that came out of Mexico in the U.S. media was basically bad news. And had to explain why this was an important country to us.
How did you do that?
Well, I went back to the United States very often, not once a week, but I had speeches all over the country. I had lots of meetings in Washington. I was astounded with the proximity, the geographical closeness of the United States and Mexico, how much ignorance there was in very high levels of government in the United States about what Mexico...
Give me perhaps an example.
Well, on the whole issue of corruption and crime, there was a lot of misunderstandings and magnification of what was in the news events. But mostly it was just making calls on the different cabinet people, the different members of Congress, House and Senate, and explaining things that had come up that were misunderstood. We also tried to get a lot of members of Congress to come down to Mexico. From the standpoint of the government, one of the things we initiated was to have basically cabinet-to-cabinet meetings. It started out well, and then on the U.S. side, a lot of the cabinet officers the top cabinet officers didn't show up, didn't come, and it petered itself out by the time I left. And so it was mostly just trying to set up means of communications and understanding so that you had people who were in high positions in both governments understanding who their counterparts were and what their motivations were.
During that time, did you ever feel like this situation is untenable?
No. Number one, I could see the results of NAFTA fairly quickly. Both in
how so?
Well, in the attitudes about the United States from Mexicans. The Mexican business leadership saw the opportunities of doing business with the United States, getting investment, etc. And they were this was sort of unshackling them in many ways. So it was basically that. But there were still misunderstandings. Going back to the Chiapas situation, one of the things I was most proud of was I got information from different cabinet people who were in Mexico, who had been very progressive and very progressive in terms of their outlook about our relationship. That when the Zapatistas were basically taking over certain territory, that the plan was going to be to send the Mexican military down there and with a great show of force just wipe them out. And so I kept trying to see President Salinas Finally, in conjunction with something else, I did see him and he did hear me out. But basically, and we had the foreign minister, Camacho, who was very much in the same camp that I was. But the old way of dealing with it in the Mexican government would be to basically go in with show of force and wipe them out. My sense was, and I told the president this, that when I was in the White House, we didn't lose Vietnam on the battlefield. We lost it in the sphere of public support, and that night after night, the television program, the television news showing the different casualties was such that we just lost our own support in the United States. I said, now that, and now, which was then mid-1990s, the cameras are more intrusive, and you will be on every night. You will be on how aggressive, how cruel, how unfair you are to these peasant people, and that's going to cost you a lot of support. I said the issue is, and I said the U.S. Congress will probably pass a resolution condemning you, et cetera, et cetera. I said I wouldn't worry about that. But I said my other experience on Wall Street at the American Stock Exchange was such that I think what you'll find is this with this all this kind of publicity is that the investors will drop you like a hot potato, and that your dreams of having economic resurgence, it would just go down the drain.
This is a fascinating example. I mean, where was this meeting? At Los Pinos?
In Los Pinos. Yeah.
Over dinner? Or?
No, what happened is we had a business delegation from the United States, and I escorted them over there. I had not been able to get a meeting with President Salinas, and I told his staff what I wanted to talk about. So after the meeting with the business people, I told him I'd meet them outside, and I asked the president if I could have a few minutes with him, and that's where that occurred.
I mean, that was such a crucial year, 1994. The devaluation happens. How do you keep it together? How do you keep the United States, Mexico together? How do you keep American businesses engaged?
Well, fortunately, President Clinton really wanted to build on the relationship, and so when the peso devaluation hit, first of all, the information out of the central bank was faulty, and nobody saw it coming. Our best guess of what their reserves were had to come through the CIA and those means of getting information. And so when it hit, it just went rapid fire. I think, if I recall the numbers, something like 36 billion was their reserves that we estimated they had. And then for a variety of reasons, which is too long a story, but the investors on Wall Street or in the financial markets felt they were not getting straight information from the government, and so they just started pulling out the reserves, and so it just snowballed overnight, basically. So from that point, basically, Larry Summers over at Treasury but Larry Summers was the driving force. Bob Rubin was the supporting force, etc. And Larry's staff really started developing a plan for a rescue package. And of the 30 billion that they put together, we put together as a government, only about 17 billion was real, and that was mostly our money. And then we had to figure out how do we do that and get the political support in the United States and in the Congress for it. And so we had to start extracting a lot of things out of Mexico. For example, the currency flowing through the Federal Reserve in New York. We had to put a hold on that. The central bank, we had to get a commitment that the central bank would truly be transparent and independent, which is lasts until today. which was a very major improvement. So we did things like that, and I was flying to Washington virtually every Monday, meeting with Summers and others who were in the Congress to try to build support for a rescue package. Because I think we were within days of basically Mexico becoming bankrupt, and then we kept trying to put together bipartisan support in the Congress, and finally Newt Gingrich, who had just won a big victory in the House for the Republicans, and Dick Gephardt, who was the leader of the Democrats, they couldn't get together and couldn't agree to anything. And so on one Monday, when I was flying up, I got called at the airport in Washington from Larry Summers and said it's fallen through, so we got to go see the president. So we went over to see the president. Al Gore, the vice president, acted as the devil's advocate, and Larry and I made the presentation of why we had to do this, and that the president would have to do it on his own, take the political risk, and not rely on the Congress. So we presented to the president, and I had known President Clinton for a while, and he liked to take very measured tones and not make a quick decision. We made the presentation. Al Gore was a great cross-examiner. He was really tough. And the president said, we'll do it. And so then we had to get the bipartisan leadership of the House and Senate up to tell them what we were planning to do and get their support, which we did. And then the rest is history.
But I mean, at the time, there was a lot of criticism about the bailout.
Very much criticism, because it was being interpreted by the political leadership, particularly in Congress, as a bailout and as we're going to lose all this money. Well, it turns out Mexico repaid within 8 months, as I recall, and I think we made about $1 billion in profit, basically, for interest costs. So it was a very good deal. Mexico did not have to take bankruptcy, and it started taking off as an economy itself. So it was the right decision, but it was a very, very tough time to get it done.
It was a very tumultuous time. What advice do you have for both sides today? There's a lot of tension between the United States and Mexico.
Well, I think I have found in anything when I've been in politics or public service, if you get to know whoever you're dealing with on a human basis, you can work most things out. And it's when you consider your adversary as some sort of a caricature or some sort of a cartoon character, that's when you can't reach an agreement. But if you get to know the people you have to deal with, their families, et cetera, you can solve an awful lot of problems.
During your term, did you see any signs that would perhaps foreshadow what we see today, some of the issues that we see today?
Well, I think such as, what are you talking about?
Such as, for example, the immigration issue, the security issue. I mean, we're talking about the early 90s, mid-90s.
Right. The immigration issue was a problem because you had, in those days, basically mostly young. I used to go to the border and talk to these people. They were mostly young, mostly male, and they just wanted to go to the United States, earn some dollars, send it back home, then come back. But it was growing in numbers. The security problem is something that still is a problem today, in that there is perceived to be widespread corruption in the law enforcement agencies and entities of Mexico. I think there is also fairly wide corruption in U.S. law enforcement that's just brought about by the huge numbers and the fear of dealing with these drug organizations and criminal organizations. So that's a problem that still exists today. It's something when we're in the middle of talking right now about that among these former ambassadors, and none of us, we can point out the problems, but none of us have the solution. I mean, we tried when I was here of having totally vetted units, that we did everything. to have honest people come in to lead them in an honest way, etc. And within months, it had been compromised. Different members of the units had been compromised. I don't know how you deal with that. That's still a problem.
Last thing, is there a question maybe I didn't ask or something that you want to stress?
I'm sorry?
Something that you would like to stress?
Well, I think one of the things I'd like to stress is how important the relationship is and how important it is for us to be thinking in terms of North America, and that the North American countries be thinking in terms of developing strength among Central America. And if we have the Central and North America regions with security, with economic growth, I don't think there's any region in the world that can touch us. And so if we can take that concept, and doing that, we have to also recognize that the world has changed, that people are hurt in many ways. I personally believe it's not trade that costs people jobs as much as it is technology and things of that nature, and lack of education. And I think we have to be thinking in those terms. Otherwise, we're going to be eaten alive by the Chinas and the Asian powers that are developing.
Ambassador Jones, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good to see you.
Pleasure.
Entrevista de Alfredo Corchado al embajador James Jones.